On January 10th and 11th, I was one of 4 girls that was involved in the death of Shanda Sharer.
44-year-old Melinda Loveless was released on parole. She was 16 in 1992 when Shanda Sharer was kidnapped, tortured, assaulted, and burned alive. Her body was found on the side of the road near Madison, Indiana.
Inside a quiet industrial facility at Japan's Tokaimura nuclear plant, 3 workers carried out what seemed like a routine task. Hisashi Ouchi, 35, and Masato Shinohara, 29, worked near a steel precipitation tank, while their 54-year-old supervisor, Yutaka Yokokawa, monitored from nearby. They were mixing uranium fuel, and in an effort to meet a pressing deadline, they skipped several crucial safety procedures. Enriched uranium was poured directly into the tank by hand, an amount nearly 7 times higher than regulations allowed. What they don't realize is that they're only seconds away from setting off a criticality accident. The mixture is about to tip in a critical mass, unleashing a burst of radiation unlike anything a human has ever survived. And then it happens. A sudden, blinding blue flash fills the room. Gamma rays rip through their bodies. They scramble out, but the damage is already irreversible. This moment would then mark the beginning of Hisashi Ouchi's 83-day nightmare, the most excruciating death by radiation in human history. But he's not alone, so let's take a look at the worst deaths in human history. September 30th, 1999. Before the blue flash, Hisashi Ouchi was just trying to finish his shift when emergency responders reached him at the National Institute of Radiological Sciences in Chiba. The extent of the damage wasn't immediately visible. His face was slightly red and swollen, his eyes bloodshot. He complained about pain in his ears and hand, but there weren't any obvious burns or blisters yet. The doctor examining him even thought there might be a chance to save him. That hope lasted exactly 1 day. Within 24 hours, Ouchi's condition deteriorated rapidly. He needed oxygen, then his abdomen swelled. When medical staff removed the tape from his chest, his skin came off with it. 6 days after the accident, a specialist examined images of Ouchi's chromosomes. What he should have seen were intact, organized structures. Instead, he found only scattered black dots. The radiation had shattered them completely. Ouchi's body had lost its ability to regenerate cells. His bone marrow could no longer produce white blood cells to fight infection or red blood cells to carry oxygen. His outer layer of skin, his epidermis, was essentially destroyed. Without chromosomes to enable regeneration, his protective barrier began to vanish. Doctors tried a peripheral blood stem cell transplant. His sister volunteered as the donor, hoping her cells might restore some function to his immune system. Initially, his white blood cell count increased. For a brief moment, it seemed like the experimental treatment might work. Then his body rejected everything. Blisters erupted across his skin. The pain became unbearable. Medical staff discovered that his DNA was so obliterated that grafted skin couldn't take hold. Each attempted intervention failed. 2 weeks in, he couldn't eat anymore. Doctors fed him intravenously. The radiation had exposed him to between 16 and 25 gray equivalents, a dose so extreme that most experts can barely comprehend it. For context, exposure to more than 7 sieverts is considered fatal. Ouchi received more than double that. His colleague Masato Shinohara, who'd been standing about 18 inches away, absorbed between 6 and 9 gray equivalents. Their supervisor, Yutaka Yokokawa, positioned farther from the tank, received 3 sieverts. All 3 doses were catastrophic, but Ouchi's was in a category of its own. Doctors continued experimental treatments for months. They administered repeated skin grafts knowing they wouldn't hold. They used painkillers, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and granulocyte colony stimulating factor. Nothing measurably helped. Small areas of his skin and mucous membranes showed temporary recovery, but overall his body continued to undergo a systematic collapse. Medical personnel privately questioned whether treatment should continue. They watched Ouchi endure agony that seemed to serve no purpose except prolonging his suffering. 2 months after the accident, on November 27th, Ouchi's heart stopped. Doctors revived him at his family's request. Then it stopped again and again. 3 cardiac arrests in a single hour. Each time they brought him back. By December, brain damage from repeated cardiac arrest compounded the radiation's destruction. Ouchi had become unresponsive. On December 19th, doctors finally explained to his family the full hopelessness of his condition. They suggested a do not resuscitate order. The family agreed, and his wife had hoped he might survive until January 1st, the dawn of the year 2000. Just one more milestone. He didn't make it. December 21st, 1999, at 11:21 p.m., Hisashi Ouchi suffered a final cardiac arrest. This time, doctors let him go. Multiple organ failure ended what medical staff privately considered the most excruciating death they'd ever witnessed. His colleague, Masato Shinohara, fought for 7 more months. Despite stem cell transfusions, his body gradually surrendered. Radiation exacerbated infections and internal bleeding overwhelmed his systems. On April 27, 2000, lung and kidney failure claimed him. Their supervisor, Yotaka Yokokawa, was the only survivor. Released after 3 months of treatment for minor radiation sickness, he faced criminal negligence charges in October 2000. Over 600 people were exposed to radiation that day. JCO set up compensation booths and eventually paid $121 million to settle 6,175 claims. In March 2000, the company became the first Japanese nuclear operator punished by law for mishandling radiation. 6 officials were charged with professional negligence, and the company president resigned. But no legal consequences could reverse what happened to Ouchi. The real tragedy was in the details investigators uncovered. The workers had been following an unauthorized manual, a shortcut procedure created in 1995 that management knew violated safety protocols. They'd been pouring 7 times the legal limit of enriched uranium into steel buckets by hand, a process specifically designed to be automated for safety. None of the 3 men had proper training for handling uranium at that enrichment level. They didn't understand what could happen when too much uranium reached critical mass in an improperly designed container. The investigation revealed inadequate regulatory oversight, a lack of safety culture, and obsolete procedures that should have been corrected after a 1997 incident at a nearby facility. In other words, Hisashi Ouchi's 83-day nightmare was entirely preventable. Hisashi Ouchi's death stands as one of the most horrific radiation poisoning cases in human history, not just because of the dose he received, but because of how long he was kept alive while his body systematically destroyed itself. However, if you think that's the worst way to die, the next death will prove that sometimes the cruelest fate isn't radiation or disease. It's what other humans are capable of inflicting. November 25th, 1988. A 17-year-old girl pedals home from her part-time job through the quiet streets of Masato, Japan. Within hours, she'll be gone. What follows isn't just murder. It's 44 days that would expose the darkest depths of human cruelty and shake an entire nation to its core. Her name was Junko Furuta, and this is how 4 teenage boys destroyed her. Junko wasn't just another high school student. She was the kind of girl everyone noticed. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. She had dreams. She worked 2 jobs, saving money for a graduation trip. Teachers loved her. Classmates admired her. She wanted to be a singer. She had her whole life mapped out ahead of her. But someone else had different plans. Hiroshi Miyano was 18. Rich kid with expensive cars and designer clothes. The kind of guy who walked through school hallways like he owned them. And in many ways, he did, because Hiroshi had something most teenagers didn't: connections to the Yakuza, Japan's notorious crime syndicate. People feared him. People stayed out of his way. When Hiroshi asked Junko out, he expected a yes. He wasn't used to hearing no, but Junko politely turned him down. She wasn't interested. For most people, that would be the end of it. For Hiroshi, it was just the beginning. That November evening, Hiroshi and his friend Shinji Minato spotted Junko on her bicycle. What happened next was calculated, deliberate. Hiroshi ordered Shinji to knock her off her bike, then flee. The plan was simple. Hiroshi would play the hero, pretend to witness the attack, and offer to walk her home safely. She trusted him. He led her to a warehouse, and there, any pretense of kindness vanished. Hiroshi, he threatened to kill her if she screamed. Then he took her to a hotel, raped her again, and then, because one monster wasn't enough, he called his friends.
Joe Ogura, Yasushi Watanabe. They arrived at 3 a.m. The group took Junko to a park. They found her home address in her backpack. They told her they were Yakuza. They told her if she tried to escape, they'd murder her entire family. She believed them. She had no choice. They took her to Shinji Minato's house in Adachi, Tokyo. His parents were home. They saw Junko. At first, the boys made her pretend to be Shinji's girlfriend. But eventually, when it became clear Minato's parents weren't going to call the police, they dropped the act entirely. Junko's parents reported her missing on November 27th. The kidnappers forced her to call home 3 times, telling her mother she'd run away but was safe with friends. That phone call sealed her fate. The police stopped looking. What came next was 44 days of hell, and the torture began almost immediately. Junko was raped daily, sometimes by multiple men. The 4 boys invited gang members, friends, acquaintances. Over 100 different men raped her more than 400 times. One day alone, she was raped by 12 different people. They shaved her hair, forced her to dance naked, made her masturbate while they watched. They inserted objects into her body, bottles, metal rods, lit matches. They poured lighter fluid on her legs and set her on fire. They hung her from the ceiling and beat her with golf clubs and iron rods. When she couldn't walk anymore, they made her sleep outside on the balcony during winter. Sometimes they locked her in a freezer. They forced her to drink massive amounts of water, milk, and alcohol, made her smoke multiple cigarettes at once, made her inhale paint thinner. By December, Junko was barely recognizable, malnourished, infected. Her face was so swollen, she was unrecognizable. Her brain had begun to shrink from the trauma. She lost control of her bladder and bowels. Her body started to smell of rot. She begged them to kill her. They refused. One night, she managed to call the police. She was caught before she could speak. They set her feet on fire as punishment. Then something happened that could have saved her. A friend of the boys developed a conscience. He told his parents about Junko. They called the police. Officers showed up at Minato's house to investigate. Minato's parents answered the door. They knew Junko was upstairs. They knew what was happening. The police asked if there was a girl being held there. Minato's parents said no. Then, they invited the officers inside to search. The police declined. They left. Later, Minato's parents would claim they were afraid. Afraid of their son, afraid of the Yakuza. But they had a chance. The police were at their door, and they said nothing. Junko would never get another chance. January 4th, 1989, day 44. Hiroshi lost a game of mahjong the night before. He was angry. He decided to take it out on Junko. He poured lighter fluid on her body and set her on fire. She tried to put out the flames, but her body was too weak. The assault lasted 2 hours. At 10 a.m., Junko Furuta died. The boys panicked. They wrapped her body in blankets, stuffed it into a travel bag, then placed it inside a 55-gallon oil drum. They filled it with concrete. At 8 p.m., they dumped it on a vacant lot in Koto, Tokyo. Before sealing the drum, Hiroshi placed something inside. A videotape of the final episode of a TV show Junko had mentioned wanting to see. He later said it wasn't out of pity. He just didn't want her ghost to haunt him. For months, the drum sat there, undiscovered, hidden in plain sight. Then fate intervened, but not how you'd hope. January 1989. Police arrested Hiroshi and Joe for a completely different crime. The gang
of another 19-year-old woman. During interrogation, Hiroshi made a critical mistake. He thought the police already knew about Junko. He thought Joe had confessed, so he told them where to find her body. The officers were confused. They weren't asking about Junko. They were asking about an unsolved double murder, a woman and her 7-year-old son. That case remains unsolved to this day. But Hiroshi's confession led them to the drum. On March 29, 1989, they recovered Junko's body, and she was identified by her fingerprints. An autopsy revealed she'd been pregnant when she died, likely from one of the hundreds of rapes. All 4 boys were arrested. They pleaded guilty, not to murder, but to committing bodily injury that resulted in death. The sentences: Hiroshi Miyano, 20 years, Joe Ogura, 5 to 10 years, Shinji Minato, 5 to 9 years, Yasushi Watanabe, 5 to 7 years. Japan erupted in outrage. The perpetrators were juveniles, so their identities were legally protected. But journalists from Shukan Bunshun magazine uncovered their names and published them anyway, arguing they didn't deserve anonymity. The public demanded life sentences, demanded death. But the court said their hands were tied. These were minors. The law was the law. Hiroshi was released in 2009. He changed his name to Yokoyama. He reportedly bragged about his Yakuza connections and got involved in fraud schemes. In 2013, he was arrested for bank fraud, but never charged. Joe Ogura was released in 1999, changed his name to Kamisaku, got married, moved to Chiba, started working in IT. But his past caught up with him. In 2004, he kidnapped and beat a man he thought was involved with his girlfriend, shoved him in a trunk, beat him for 4 hours. He was sentenced to 4 more years. He died in 2022 at age 51, alone in his apartment, his head stuck between a toilet bowl and tank, choking on his own vomit. Shinji Minato was released in 1998. In 2018, he was arrested for attempted murder after slashing a man's neck with a knife over a parking dispute. He was given a suspended sentence with probation. Yasushi Watanabe was released in 1996. He developed a neurodegenerative disease, died in 2021 at age 49. Hiroshi's parents were ordered to pay Junko's family $50 million in compensation, about $425,000. They sold their house, and then they gave the money to the other 3 boys instead. Junko's mother never received a yen. She eventually ended up in a mental institution, shattered by grief and injustice. But the cruelty didn't end there. Hiroshi's mother visited Junko's grave and spat on it. She blamed Junko for ruining her son's life. April 2, 1989, Junko's funeral. Her classmates wrote a eulogy that her friend read aloud.
Jun-chan, welcome back. I never dreamed we would meet again like this. You were subjected to such cruelty, weren't you? You went through so much, didn't you? I'm upset with myself that I went on living, unaware of what was happening.
Her school principal brought her diploma. She graduated with her class, 47 students total. Her future employer brought the uniform she would have worn. It was placed in her casket. The boys who killed her are mostly free now, living under new names. Some married, some with children, living the lives Junko never got to live. But if you think this story is as dark as it gets, you're wrong. Because the next case proves that sometimes the monsters aren't strangers in the night. Sometimes they're the ones closest to you.
The woman who convinced her friends to help torture and burn a 20-year-old alive just walked out of prison. Melinda Lovelace was released today from the Indiana Women's Prison in Indianapolis.
January 10, 1992. 2 teenage girls were smiling. They told 12-year-old Shanda Sharer they were taking her to see someone she cared about. But Shanda had no idea she was walking into a trap. For context, Shanda Sharer was just trying to navigate middle school. New town, new school, the usual anxieties of being 12. She'd recently started attending Hazelwood Middle School in New Albany, Indiana, after her mother's divorce forced another move. But Shanda found her footing fast. She made friends, joined the basketball team, and she met someone who made her feel seen, a 15-year-old girl named Amanda Hevron. The two grew close. Too close, according to Amanda's ex-girlfriend. Melinda Loveless was 16, and she wasn't letting go without a fight. When she saw Shanda and Amanda together at a school dance that October, jealousy turned to rage. She confronted Shanda in front of everyone, threatened her, told friends she wanted her dead. Shanda's mother caught wind of the threats and pulled her daughter out of Hazelwood, transferring her to a Catholic school. But that only delayed the inevitable because Melinda wasn't done. Melinda began recruiting. First, she pulled in 17-year-old Lori Tackett, a girl with a dark reputation. Lori had dabbled in the occult, told friends she wanted to watch someone die. She'd been in and out of psychiatric care for hallucinations and borderline personality disorder. Then came the younger two, 15-year-olds Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence. They were Lori's friends, but they'd never met Melinda or Shanda before that night. On January 10th, the four girls piled into Lori's car. Hope and Tony thought they were going to a punk rock show in Louisville, but Melinda had other plans. She told them they were going to teach a little girl a lesson. At first, it sounded like typical teenage drama. Scare the girl, make her back off, nothing serious. But Melinda wasn't bluffing. Just after midnight, the girls pulled up to Shanda's father's house in Jeffersonville. Melinda hid in the back seat under a blanket, clutching a knife. Hope and Tony knocked on the door. Shanda answered. She was hesitant, but the girls were convincing. They told her Amanda was waiting for her at a place the locals called the Witch's Castle, an abandoned stone house on a hill overlooking the Ohio River. Shanda changed her clothes and climbed into the car. The moment the door shut, Melinda sprang up from the back seat and pressed the knife to Shanda's throat. The girl froze, sobbing, begging the others to help. No one did.
Rock shelter. Melinda was more taunting her, and I was being a bully too. I was laughing at her, making remarks about the situation. I bet you're gonna leave Amanda alone now.
He drove her to the Witch's Castle. Melinda forced Shanda inside and tied her up. She taunted her, threatened to cut off her hair, made her beg for her life. Lori joined in, telling Shanda the place was filled with human remains, and hers would be next.
Melinda was going after Shanda with the knife, and I didn't see her cut Shanda with it or, stab at her or anything like that, but she was holding it up to her, threatening her with it.
But the Witch's Castle was too visible, too risky, so they threw Shanda back in the car and kept driving. They ended up at a remote logging road near Madison. Melinda and Lori dragged Shanda out of the car and into the woods. What happened next was unspeakable. They beat her, slammed her face into her knees until her braces cut through her lips, tried to slit her throat, but the knife was too dull, so they stabbed her in the chest, strangled her with a rope, sodomized her with a tire iron. When Shanda finally stopped moving, they threw her in the trunk and drove back to Lori's house to clean up. But Shanda wasn't dead. She woke up in the trunk, whimpering, screaming for her mother. Lori grabbed a paring knife and stabbed her again and again. She came back inside covered in blood, laughing as she told the others what she'd done. Melinda and Lori got back in the car for another round of cruising. For hours, they drove through the countryside, stopping occasionally to beat Shanda with the tire iron. Every time they thought she was gone, she'd cry out again. Eventually, they realized beating wasn't enough. They pulled into a gas station, bought a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi, poured it out, and filled it with gasoline. Then they drove to a field off a gravel road. They pulled Shanda's broken body from the trunk, wrapped her in a blanket, and carried her to the frozen ground. And then came the moment that sealed her fate.
I grabbed the 2-liter and I went to hand it to her. And she was like, no, just pour it on her. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that. She said, just do it, just pour it on her. So I did.
The fire didn't kill her instantly. Witnesses would later say Melinda watched with a smile as Shanda's body writhed in the flames. After a few minutes, they returned to pour more gasoline, just to be sure. Hours later, the 4 girls sat in a McDonald's, laughing. They compared their sausage breakfast to Shanda's charred body. That same morning, 2 hunters stumbled upon the corpse in the field. Police were called. At first, they thought it was a drug hit, something meant to send a message. But by that evening, Hope and Tony couldn't hold it in anymore. They went to the sheriff's office with their parents and confessed everything. Within 48 hours, all 4 girls were in custody. The case shocked the nation. All 4 were tried as adults. To avoid the death penalty, they accepted plea deals. Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett were sentenced to 60 years. Hope Rippey got 50 years, later reduced to 35. Tony Lawrence, who cooperated early and left before the burning, got 20. Tony was released in 2000 after serving 9 years. Hope followed in 2006 after 14. Lori walked free in 2018 after 25 years. And Melinda, the ringleader, was released in 2019 after serving 26. Shanda's father never recovered. He drank himself to death in 2005, unable to live with the loss. Her mother, Jacques Vaught, channeled her grief into something else. She started a scholarship fund in Shanda's name. And years later, she did something unthinkable. She forgave Melinda Loveless. She even donated a service dog for Melinda to train in prison.
It's my choice to make, Jacques said. She's my child. If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better.
Shanda Sharer's story is one of the most brutal crimes ever committed by teenagers. But it's also a story about what happens when jealousy, abuse, and unchecked violence collide in the worst possible way. She was 12 years old, and she never made it home. Yet she's not the girl on our list to face a horrifying death.
Uno de estos corresponde a la menor Omayra Sanchez, de 12 años, la cual sobrevivió 72 horas atrapada por el lodo y el agua en una destruida casa de armero. Todos los esfuerzos por rescatarla fueron estériles.
November 13th, 1985. Armero, Colombia. A 15-year-old girl lies trapped in muddy water, buried from the waist down. Her eyes are starting to turn black, her hands deathly white. Rescue workers stand around her, helpless. She's been here for 3 days, and the world is watching her die. Her name was Omayra Sanchez, and her death would become one of the most controversial moments in modern journalism. The day started like any other in Armero, a small Colombian town of about 29,000 people. But 30 miles away, something ancient was stirring. The Nevado del Ruiz volcano had been quiet for 69 years. Locals called it the sleeping lion. That night, the lion woke up. At 9:09 p.m., the volcano exploded. Pyroclastic flows melted the mountain's ice cap in minutes. The resulting mud flow traveled at 20 feet per second, basically the speed of a car on a residential street. Except this car was made of volcanic debris, ice, and death. The lahar hit Armero in 3 massive pulses. The first wave was the killer, wiping out 85% of the city. Houses, roads, bridges, everything disappeared under thick, heavy sludge. The mud was so forceful that people trying to flee were simply swallowed whole. When the morning light came, 20,000 people were dead. Only about 5,000 survived. Armero, as a town, simply ceased to exist. Omayra was home when the lahar hit. She lived in the Santander neighborhood with her father Alvaro, her mother Maria, her brother, and her aunt Maria Adela. Her mother was away on business in Bogota that night. A mercy, considering what came next. The family heard the roar approaching. Then their house collapsed around them. When the debris settled, Omayra's father and aunt were dead. Her brother survived with just a finger lost. Omayra was trapped, but she was alive at first. That seemed like it mattered. French photojournalist Frank Fournier arrived in Bogota 2 days after the eruption. After a 5-hour drive and a 2.5-hour walk through the devastation, he reached what was left of Armero. What he found wasn't an organized rescue operation, it was chaos.
All around, hundreds of people were trapped, he later told the BBC. Rescuers were having difficulty reaching them. I could hear people screaming for help and then silence, an eerie silence. It was very haunting. A local farmer approached him.
"There's a girl who needs help," the man said. He took Fournier to her.
Omayra Sanchez was buried in water and debris up to her shoulders. Her legs were pinned beneath the concrete roof of her destroyed home.
Rescue workers had managed to free her upper body, but when they tried to pull her out, they realized the horrible truth. They couldn't, not without breaking her legs, and maybe not even then. A diver went under the water to assess the situation. What he found was nightmarish. Omayra's legs were caught under a brick door, and beneath that, her dead aunt's arms were wrapped tightly around her feet, as if still trying to protect her. The rescuers faced an impossible choice. They could try to amputate her legs, but they had no surgical equipment, no anesthesia, no way to prevent her from bleeding out or dying from shock, or they could keep her comfortable and hope that help arrived in time. They chose hope and placed a tire around her body to keep her from drowning as the water continued to rise. For 3 days, Omayra waited, and somehow, impossibly, she stayed strong. She sang songs, she asked for candy and soda, she talked to the rescue workers and journalists who gathered around her. German Santa Maria Barragan, a journalist volunteering with the rescue efforts, stayed by her side. She told him about school, about her math exam, about how she didn't want to be late.
"I'm going to miss a year because I haven't been to school for 2 days," she said.
Frank Fournier photographed her, not because he was heartless, but because he felt powerless.
"When I took the pictures, I felt totally powerless in front of this little girl who was facing death with courage and dignity." He later explained, "I felt that the only thing I could do was to report properly on the courage and the suffering and the dignity of the girl."
But by the third night, her body was giving up. Her eyes turned bloodshot, so red they appeared black. Her hands turned completely white. She began to hallucinate, drifting in and out of consciousness. She asked Fournier to take her to school. She was worried about being late. At one point, she asked the rescue workers to leave so they could rest. Hours later, they returned with a pump, a last-ditch effort to drain the water and free her. But when they tried, they discovered her legs were bent beneath the concrete as if she were kneeling. It was anatomically impossible to pull her out without severing her limbs. The doctors made the call. Without proper surgical equipment, amputation would kill her just as surely as leaving her there. It would just be more painful. So they let her die. November 16, 1985, 10:05 a.m. Omayra Sanchez took her last breath. Her cause of death was listed as either gangrene or hypothermia, probably both. When she died, she pitched backward in the water. One arm thrusts out. Only her nose, mouth, and one eye remained above the surface. Someone covered her body with a blue and white check tablecloth. Frank Fournier's photograph of Omayra, black-eyed, soaked, hanging on to life, was published in Paris Match magazine days later. It went global almost immediately. And then came the outrage. How could a photographer just stand there and watch a child die? How could the world transmit her suffering around the globe but not save her? Where were the helicopters, the equipment, the army? The Colombian government was eviscerated. Witness accounts revealed a rescue operation that was practically non-existent. There were a few Red Cross volunteers, some civil defense workers, and desperate families digging through mud with their bare hands. But Colombia's 100,000-person army, the 65,000-member police force, nowhere to be found. General Miguel Vega Uribe, Colombia's Minister of Defense, defended the response.
"We are an underdeveloped country and don't have that kind of equipment," he said.
Critics weren't buying it. Foreign diplomats and volunteers said the government had refused offers of help from international rescue teams. Equipment that could have saved lives sat unused in other countries, while Omayra drowned in front of cameras. And here's the thing. Scientists had predicted this eruption. A hazard map was even created in October 1985, the first ever prepared for a Colombian volcano. It clearly showed that our marrow was in the path of potential lahars. But officials dismissed the warnings. Local economic interests opposed evacuation plans. The government was distracted by a guerrilla siege in Bogotá just days before the eruption. And when the volcano finally blew, no one was ready. Omayra Sanchez died because of nature, but she stayed trapped and suffered for 60 hours because of negligence. Her mother, Maria Aleda, was doing a radio interview when she learned her daughter was dead. She cried silently while the hosts asked listeners to join in a moment of silence.
Then she said something remarkable. "It is horrible, but we have to think about the living. I will live for my son who only lost a finger."
Strength, even in unbearable grief. Frank Fournier's photograph won the 1986 World Press Photo of the Year. It became one of the most iconic and controversial images of the 20th century. For decades, people have debated the ethics of that photo. Was Fournier a vulture, profiting off a child's death? Or was he doing exactly what a photojournalist should do, bearing witness to suffering so the world couldn't look away? Fournier has always maintained he did the right thing.
There are hundreds of thousands of Omayras around the world. Important stories about the poor and the weak. He said, "We photojournalists are there to create the bridge."
And that photograph did create change. The Colombian government, humiliated by international criticism, created the National Office for Disaster Preparedness. All Colombian cities were ordered to develop emergency plans for natural disasters. In 2020, scientists even named a newly discovered species of cricket after her, Gigagrillis omayrae, a small tribute to a girl who became a symbol. Today, Armero is still abandoned. It's a ghost town, literally. Christian crosses mark where the town used to be. A small monument stands in Omayra's honor. Locals and tourists visit to leave flowers and prayers. Her face is still everywhere in Colombia, in poems, novels, songs. A punk rock band in Chile named themselves after her, expressing their discontent with government negligence. Isabel Allende wrote a short story inspired by Omayra's ordeal,
later saying, "Her big black eyes, filled with resignation and wisdom, still pursue me in my dreams."
But perhaps the most haunting tribute came from journalist German Santa Maria Barragan, who stayed by her side until the end.
He wrote, "Of all the horrors I saw at Armero, nothing was more painful than seeing the face of Omayra Sanchez under the ruins of her house."
Her death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a failure of leadership, of preparation, of humanity. But her courage, that was something else entirely.